Otis Carr and his people out to California, and we met. And it was like I died and went to heaven. I couldn't believe that I could talk to someone about the laws of nature who not only completely understood them, but every breath he was teaching me something that I needed to know. And it was this teamwork back and forth that accelerated his interests were similar to mine, and it accelerated the ideas of getting it done. And while talking to him, I found out about his background, and he was a disciple. He was a protege, if you will, of Nikola Tesla. And this was in back east in Baltimore, Maryland. And he was, Carr at the time, I think, was a clerk in one of the hotels that Tesla's was staying in. And Tesla got acquainted with him and found that Carr was an open mind. He was like a sponge. He wanted to learn all he could, so Tesla befriended him and taught him endless things about natural law, how simple things are. And so when I found that out, I had heard about Nikola Tesla, and I'd ordered a book from Yugoslavia. You couldn't get it in this country at the time, a great big book on all his patents and all his experiments that he had done. Well, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, I guess. I'm not following my notes my wife made up, and she said, follow your notes or you're going to get lost, and that's where I'm at. Anyhow, I'll back up a little bit. When I left Advanced Kinetics, just a short time after, within a week, and this is the God's truth, 3 guys in black suits, and this is before I even heard anything about Men in Black or any of that stuff, showed up on my doorstep, and they said they were representatives of the DeWalt School of Electronics, and they had somehow heard about a lot of my experiments and things that I were doing, and they asked if they could come in and talk to me. Well, I said, sure. So we got in, and they got a little too probing at first. They wanted to know. My wife got uncomfortable right at first. She was really leery of the questions they were asking. And I've always been one, if people ask questions, I want to give them all the answers I can, no matter what. I want them to know as much as I know so they can give me as much as they know. I'm kind of greedy. I want more. And so they were probing into how I knew all this and other things that I'd gotten into. And my wife became very uncomfortable and asked him to leave. She said, you'll have to leave now, and you can come back later or whatever, but you're going to have to leave. And she explained to me later that she had a hunch that they weren't in our best interest to continue the conversations of what we were doing. And she didn't think they were from this School of Electronics. So she told me to get this big book of Teslas and a lot of my experiments, a lot of paperwork, and get them out of the house. She says, I don't know what's going on, and she's been noticing people watching the house and all, and she said, just get them out of here, because I don't want them around the kids and so forth. And I said, okay. Well, I'd heard of I didn't know what to do, and this is just before I met Carr. A guy down in Southern California, in Joshua Tree, California, by the name of George Van Tassel, that had used a lot of these same techniques, a lot of these same ideas in building what he called an integratron. And this was in Giant Rock, California, I think is where it was, down in Joshua Tree. Well, I was just guided, if you will, to take this book that he could use, because my wife didn't want me to have it anymore, and take it down to him. So I got in my car and I drove down to Giant Rock, and everything was coincidentally happening. I must have been on time because I hit all green lights. I knew where to turn. I didn't have a map, but I got there anyhow, and I got there at the right time, and him and I met eye to eye, and I said, I had something for you, and he says, I know, I've been expecting you. So by then, I was beginning to realize that you can get blown out of the water by just following natural law, just being your natural self and doing your natural thing, not trying to do anything, but just be who you are, that these things happen. So I gave him the book, and he said, thank you, and so forth, and we talked and visited a little while, and then I went off. I was in kind of a daze. This was all kind of new to me. UFOs and everything were kind of, I knew about them and stuff, but I wasn't really into that. So I went over on a little hillside, and I wanted to rest a little bit before I drove back, and I laid down on this hillside, and it was getting twilight time. It was dark, getting dark. And I looked up in the sky, and not hundreds, but thousands of these things were in the sky. I mean, they were everywhere, just lights, blue, green. They were silver, metallic. And they would come over where I was at, and they'd come down, not close enough where I could reach them, which I would like to have done, but they came down close enough so I could see details on the bottom of these things. And then they take off really fast. And that's when I really, really attached nature to there's more here than meets the eye. I mean, there's a lot more that we don't understand going on. And I didn't know why that had happened to me until later on somebody said, well, that's easy. You took the book to a guy that needed it, and this was a thanks from people that knew what's going on, whether you did or not. So I accepted that. And see how I'm doing on time. I guess I'm okay. Get my notes here. Well, let's see. Okay. Page 2. There it is. Okay. Okay. So I got back home, and that's when I was introduced. That's when I was invited and introduced to Otis Carr. And there were some people in the group. These were very influential people in the community. There were doctors. There were I don't know if there was any lawyers, but there was doctors there, and people in government and everything that believed there was something more than what we were doing, and something more that we could be doing. And so one of them had a big cabin up at Lake Arrowhead. That's up near Big Bear. That's up above Riverside, California. That's close to San Bernardino, California. And they said, why don't you boys go on up there until we can figure out what we can do to get you guys going. And we knew we were on a time, a countdown to a window, if you will, of getting something out to the public before we were asked to quit. The same thing as I experienced at the lab. And so they did. They put us up at Lake Arrowhead. There was, I think there was about 8 of us, maybe more, but I remember 8 of us. There was a Dennis Ripoldi, an Art Aho, myself, Norman Colton. There was a lot of us. And we'd sit around all night long and brainstorm. And until the seams just about busted, we wanted to do something. We wanted to get in the lab and start running experiments on what we knew we could do. Well, it wasn't too much longer. Within a week, they called us and said, we've got a lab for you, coincidentally, down on the other side of the hill in Apple Valley. Hesperia to be exact. There was a giant laboratory built with all the facilities, a warehouse, a laboratory, machine shops, offices, and so forth, that was built, and the people that it was built for didn't want it anymore, or they reneged or something. But it's yours, and no charge. Come on down. So we went down, and we started, right away, we started experimenting, and I got into very, very close proximity to Mr. Carr. And he was like, in retrospect now, he was like a being from another world, and which I know now we all are. and that you just have to get into each other to find that in ourselves and each other, that we all have a storehouses of wisdom and knowledge and talents that have become buried because of circumstances. Well, anyway, we'd sit out under the stars and talk all night long, and I'd never get tired. I would rest. I wouldn't even sleep because I was so fascinated with the subject matter. And he was explaining. Could you put that the interior, the slide on? He was explaining about what he was doing with spaceships. This is the interior of our model, and also we had a eventually 45-foot model. This is the interior of it, and he was explaining that it's all magnetics. It's these. I don't have a pointer, but there are little things called neutrons. They're double tetrahedron. A double tetrahedron is two ice cream cones stuck together at the top. You have a point and a point. That's a double tetrahedron. And when you look at this a different way, it becomes a square. You can turn it and it becomes a square, or it becomes a circle, or it becomes a pyramid. It is what's referred to as the Platonic solids in one sphere, in one thing. And this was the neutron that we used. It had all the shapes in one. And this was explained to me to be what's known as sacred geometry, that once you align yourself with natural laws and the rivers or the frequencies that we live in, then life becomes very, very simple, very, very unique, and you can do anything you want to do. Anything you set your mind to, you can do it, without exception. So, in his day, Nikola Tesla had some brilliant ideas about natural law, and at one time he was put to work by Westinghouse and Edison because of his ability to find how electricity and all the components work. And he developed the dynamo. He developed alternating current, as you probably already know. But in the course of his life, he was asked by the backers. At that time, the main backer was J.P. Morgan. If they couldn't get something going where they could make a lot of money. Well, Tesla wasn't really into money. I mean, he wanted to develop natural sciences, and he was funded by Morgan to go ahead and experiment, and he produced the dynamo. He produced many things to do with electricity, and then he eventually was called in to, I'm using an analogy because I don't know the facts, the details, but I know the essence of it. He was called into Morgan's office and as a progress report, where are you, Tesla? What are you doing? And Tesla said, hey, I've got it. We've got it made for humanity. We got it made. I can produce electricity from out of the air. We're living in a sea of electricity. It's all around us. It's magnetic in nature. And we can convert that into all the electrical power you'll ever need to operate anything you ever want. And he had been funded, and with part of the funds, he built a couple of places. One was in Colorado Springs and Wardenhof in north of New York and Manhattan Island. These towers that would transmit power without wires. And he would light up things a mile, 2-3 miles away through the air like magic. And he said, we can produce electricity anywhere on the earth, and we can give people the equivalent of a rod that you can stick 30 feet in the ground and extend 30 feet in the air, and they can run everything that's electrical in their house forever without spending a dime, with no maintenance, no pollution. And Morgan said, wait, stop right there, Tesla. He said, we've got ways to transmit electricity now. We've got copper mills. We can dig into the ground and get copper. We've got trees we can cut down all over the planet to make telephone poles. And that's jobs, Tesla. That means money. That's the monetary system. And that's what we're going to live by. We can't use this stuff. This is, and he said, and Tesla said, but if you would give everybody the right to freedom from a meter charging them for electricity, you would then give them the opportunity to find out who and what they really are, who and what they really want to be, their natural talents. They would be scientists beyond our dreams. There would be artists beyond our dreams that we would allow to come out because they're not in servitude. They're not under the, it's enough, that's enough, Tesla, get out. And that was kind of the end of that. So I got a lot to tell you, so I'm going to cut a little short, but the upshot of that was that Tesla, from that point on, became very, very disappointed in the system. And he, in trying to get his ideas out, met Otis Carr, who was like a sponge. He sucked up all the information he could. And he told Carr, he said, it looks like they're not going to want what I have to offer. He said, this would make life so much easier for everybody, for all of us. And it doesn't have to do with money. It has to do with love. The love of life, the love of people. And so, Mr. Carr, you're elected. You're going to be my carry-on through, and I'm going to teach you everything I know before I transcend to you give it your best shot and try and get the simplicity of life across to people, how simple it is, and no cost, no money involved at all. It's all labor of love. Well, Carr really got involved with it, and he got busy. He got laboratories together. He started building these things. Oh, that's me. Okay. Anyhow, can you show the large craft, please? The 45-foot diameter craft. That's what Carr was all about. And Carr went into metaphysics. He got into all facets of the unknown, phenomenal things, esoteric things. And he kept coming back to nature, the laws of nature, which I could really identify with. And so we got down in Napa Valley, and we started building and developing things. This was a large craft. This is the 45-foot craft. The one you saw previous to this, a smaller bench model. Let's see if I'm covering everything here. Excuse me. Circuit of gel. Okay, yeah. Okay, this smaller model. Could you put the small model back on again, please? The prototype, the little one. Anyhow, I was fortunate enough to be. I was just a technician, and we had many engineers. We had many people, but we didn't use credentials. We used our brains. We used our minds. And Carr would explain time after time to all of us, you've got to go beyond the brain, because the brain is a computer that operates the body, and its sole function is a third-dimensional reality, and it doesn't know or want to know anything beyond that. So if you follow your brain, you're going to stay in the same thing forever and ever and ever, and you'll be chasing your tail around and around. You've got to use your mind. You've got to get out of the brain. Just respect it for what it is, because it's running your body. But so what he meant by that was that the things we're going to experience now that he had learned from Tesla and his own experiments was above the physical, conventional techniques of science, as far as we went in the third dimension. And what he called it was ether technology, above and beyond the taught run-of-the-mill physics. And what he meant by that was you had to use your mind to comprehend. You had to get all your doubts and fears out of the way to get to your mind. And then once you got to your mind, you had to still it down and started following nature. And miracles, he said, would happen. And in my testing of that, I found that, sure enough, the more I calmed down and became just still, the more things would come to me. Things I wanted to know for years. Somebody would show up and hand me a whole book. Or if I wanted a hamburger and I was hungry, but I didn't want to leave the lab, somebody would be getting hamburgers and bring them to the workbench. Just phenomenal things would start happening. So he said, okay, we're going to have this experiment. We put this on the workbench, and we fired it up. This was made out of a high-polished aluminum. That's all it was aluminum. And you could touch the periphery, you could touch anything on the craft, and it was pretty solid. But as they increased the frequencies, it was similar to the ping pong ball experiment, only this was different. This was in a little slightly different dimension than that. They started increasing the frequencies that this craft was vibrating on. It had so many cycles per second that it was operating on in this dimension. So as you increase that frequency, you start getting into resonance with its surroundings. And I kept touching this thing, and then pretty soon I noticed that it was getting softer and softer. And then pretty soon I put my fingers right through the shell of this craft here, right into the side of it, which blew me out of the water. And Carr says, come on. He knew this. He knew all about it. And he knew this is quite simple to understand, that once you reach a resonant frequency of anything, then you're free of the confines of the environment, of any environment, no matter what it is. And like the bumblebee. So we had one more experiment with a craft similar to this, that this was the next day, I think it was, or close to the next day. And he said, now we're going to go a little further. And so we increased the frequency like a fan blade. The faster it goes, it starts disappearing. It starts getting fuzzier and fuzzier. Well, this thing right before our very eyes started getting fuzzy. And pretty soon, it was gone. completely gone. And Carr at that moment said, well, I'm not sure it's still here. It's in another frame of reference, that we may have sent it somewhere. It might show up on somebody's table. So that was my experience, my first experience with what's known as teleportation. And that is very simple as well. Once you understand the mechanics of it, it goes slightly beyond the quantum ideas, the quantum mechanics and quantum theories, because you have to use your mind quite a bit. And when you use your mind, you realize that anything below that is illusion, that we're creating it. And we create it through the brain, if you will, in the third dimension, by these little cameras that are flippering microseconds, milliseconds, and creating all these things that we give names to: lights, chairs, tables, people. And we say, well, no, this is solid. Well, it is. Everything is true. There is nothing but truth. There's nothing in the universe outside of truth. It's how we look at it, frames of reference. And so I'm off the track again. Anyhow, he said, this is what we're going to do with the big craft, and this is what we're going to have to get accomplished pretty fast, because they're on to us. They know we're in Apple Valley, and we've been shooting these little guys around the valley using the techniques that we had. And as they entered the atmosphere, they'd have a corona around the outside of them, a glow. And people in Apple Valley were becoming wondering if these were flying saucers. And we couldn't stop the glow. We didn't know how to do that at that time. So we knew that people were going to, the looky-loos and the curiosity seekers would soon be coming in. And because they didn't understand what we were doing, we knew they were going to slow things down. So we wanted to get a demonstrated model out to the public fast enough so that, and documented enough so that people would know that levitation is quite simple. There's nothing to it. In fact, the analogy that I use is that people can't always relate to is you look up in the sky, a clear blue sky, and you see clouds starting to formulate, and then you see them turning dark, and da-da-da-da-da. They're accumulating moisture right out of the air, just like an air well, and they're bringing hundreds, thousands, millions of tons. Water weighs 8 point something per gallon, 8 pounds per gallon. Millions of tons are suspended right over our heads, and then when nature gives a signal, it rains. But that's how simple levitation is. It's a balance. That's all it is. And when you understand the mechanics of magnetics, it's quite simple to levitate anything. Well, anyway, we put a prototype together, a small craft, and we had a meeting with General Motors, motor company that makes General Motors cars, to meet in Riverside at one of the hotels. We said, we want to take your wheel that's going this way on the ground, ruining the ground and grinding up animals and putting pavement everywhere, and we want to turn it sideways. We want the wheel to go from this to this and up. And we can do it. We'll show you. We can take your cars and we can levitate them for the start. And then we'll show you how to go further than that. And eventually, which gets into my department, we could have floating homes, gardens, everything on board. And everybody would have for life their own home. And then cities, and then countries. Well, this guy didn't want to hear this. He looked. We gave him a demonstration, and we levitated a small prototype. And he said, no. He said, the monetary system. Back to Morgan's idea. There's no money in that. You know, you're gonna ruin everything if you do that. We can't have that. We're making plenty of money with cars, and we'll make plenty more. So Otis, he's a very humble man, very much a gentleman, and very, very kind to everybody he ever met. And he excused himself and said, well, I'm sorry that you feel that way. But this technology is here. It's always been here. We buried it. And I think we buried it on purpose so that we could create a monetary system. But it's coming back because people are going to get fed up with living in a box, if you will, of chasing their tails, of going around and around and doing the same thing, the same car every year, over and over, just a different color, maybe a different radio. And they're learning nothing but a third-dimensional reality. And in all of space,